Hello, welcome to BasisPointInsight.com. I am Krishna Devan. We spoke with Sanjeev Sanyal, a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council and also the Chancellor of the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics. We spoke on a range of issues ranging from Trump's repeated jibes at India to get a trade deal done quickly. What is it that should be done to foster economic growth to the 8% level that one is looking for? Whether it is time now for fiscal policy to loosen up a bit. Now, with monetary policy already having done its bit, how does India get the emerging workforce employable and also ensure that the ones who are already in the workforce stay employed? All these and much more in this interview.
Hi Sanjeev, thank you for taking time in speaking to BasisPoint.com. We will jump right into the question, which is a dead question but has come out alive now. Trump has said that India is a dead economy. What is it that the US is hankering about?
Well, I think we have to take his comments with a pinch of salt, in the sense that he has made some strong comments on many other issues as well. I mean, in the end, you have to go with what the numbers are. I mean, the IMF has just released its forecasts for the world. India is by some margin the fastest growing economy of any size in the world. And, we are doing quite well. I mean, if alive or dead was an issue, then let's say we are, their economy, the US economy is growing at somewhere in the range of 2.5%. We are growing in the range of 6.5%. So I think it's kind of difficult to call us a dead economy. In fact, this year we have equaled the size of Japan in US dollar terms. And by most indications, within 24 months, we will be the world's third largest economy. So, of course, partly helped by the fact that Germany's economy is not growing at all. So we are being helped by that. But nevertheless, I mean, we are now growing significantly faster than pretty much any other economy, including China, by the way.
All right. If I were to ask you, you are a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. What would be your advice to our trade negotiators?
Well, I think the key thing is to keep our cool. As we become a larger part of the world economy, there will be increasing pushback. It will happen with those who consider themselves our adversaries, but it will even happen from people who consider themselves our friends. So our game is to really not lose our cool, make sure we are clear about what is our interests, be clear what trade-offs we are willing to make. After all, if we are negotiating, we'll have to make some trade-off, but we should be clear what are the trade-offs that we are willing to make and to push our own interests, which is what all countries do, and we should do that unabashedly. And we should, as I said, not get baited into a slanging match. There's nothing to be gained from it. Our main aim, as I said, is to get the deal we want.
That's right. The deal that we want. The deal that we want as a country is growth for us, right? How do you balance fiscal prudence with monetary loosening? Is it time that fiscal policy needs to give room now and allow growth to happen, or will monetary policy be able to carry the entire weight?
See, basically what has happened is that we are now running the economy at around about 6% GDP growth rate, which is good by global standards, clearly given the external environment, not bad at all. But yes, I mean, we would, who wouldn't want to grow at 7.5%, 8%? Question is, can we do it? Now, as we came out of COVID, obviously we got some high growth numbers because of the bounce. But then we entered into this rather turbulent period with tariff wars, actual wars, and so on. And we had to remain fairly restrained in multiple ways as we came out of that. But I think almost every macroeconomic stability number suggests that we are in a very, very good place. So our inflation is at the bottom of the range at 2%. Our external current account deficit is less than 1%. Financial stability, very, very good numbers. We just had the financial stability report. Gross and net NPA levels very low. So one could actually argue that we may have the space now for maybe pushing the accelerator a little bit carefully, but doing this, because as I said, the speed at which you drive depends not only on the quality of your car, which as I said, from the stability perspective, the car is in good shape, but the quality of the road.
Right.
Quality of the road is bumpy, but even there, given that we are, all the stability numbers are good, I think we could now swing a little bit towards faster growth. And I think we have seen with the RBI cutting rates somewhat more aggressively. And also, if you see the year-on-year numbers, growths on the capital spending for the last 2-3 months, they have been quite aggressive. So I think we are now swinging towards pushing for a higher growth. And of course, if the external environment stabilizes after all this turbulence, I think we could really push even for 8.
Right. 8 is a good number to have, but this also hinges on reforms. Now, there are 2 types of reforms that people have been talking about, and you've been advocating process reforms. That is not to say that structural reforms are not needed, but process reforms could give the immediate kicker, while structural reforms would need more consensus building around it. So, what is it that you mean by process reforms? I had a friend who told me that in Bangalore, to set up a pub, the excise department needs only 1 entrance to the pub, whereas the fire brigade needs 2.
So this is precisely the point. You see, there are always very big reforms that are needed.
Right.
And in the past, we have done quite a few of them, insolvency and bankruptcy code, GST, even this inflation targeting framework, or for that matter, the original 1991 reforms. These are structural reforms which change the structure of things. And there are some more needed. I mean, I'm not, and I will come back to them. But most of reform that we now need is really smoothing out these points. There's no great debate about 1 door or 2.
Correct.
This is not a political issue.
Right.
So my view is that these are reforms, and there are literally thousands of them that we need to do, and we need to get on with them. They don't get done because some of it is tedious to look for them, and there are so many of them. 2, there is sometimes the bureaucracy is not willing to do them because it is a source of rent seeking and that they can do. Whatever the reason may be, there is now literally thousands of such reforms that we can do, and we are doing also, but literally thousands more remain to be done. And some of them are at the central level, which I am personally pursuing, as you may be aware. But of course, at the state and even municipal level, there are hundreds of thousands of such reforms. And it's really by getting this system, the more efficiency of it, that we will get that kicker. Now, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't pursue some large structural reforms as well. One major structural reform, which I have argued for many years, so far with no success, but hopefully one day, is we need to get our judicial system working.
Right.
Because frankly, the speed at which we enforce contracts is so slow and uncertain that frankly this, in my view, and I've said it before, is perhaps the largest structural hurdle to rapid economic expansion of this country.
So let's take the IBC for instance. It was a done deal, settled. Banks would get some of their capital back, could deploy them for fresh credit. And recently we had a judgment in place which suddenly questioned everything. One is the sanctity of commercial contracts. B is how does then this foster risk taking? How do we address these issues?
So absolutely, this is the kind of things that happen, that there has to be an understanding of the economics and of this and the cost that is paid. You see, the Supreme Court is trying to think about it as some point of law issue. That is not the right way to think about it.
Okay.
Creative destruction is a messy process. So you have to have a practical rules of thumb kind of way of dealing with it. If this process is generating a reasonable outcome, then going for these corner solutions in the margin because of some technicality of law is a bad idea. Right. Because it, as you yourself pointed out, it throws the whole economics of it out of the window. In fact, it's a complete misunderstanding of the process of creative destruction. From an economic perspective, if this asset is sold by X to Y, nothing very bad has happened. It's still in the economy. What matters is that it gets transferred from X, who was an inefficient user of it, to Y, who will hopefully be an efficient user. It happens as fast as possible, so that Z, who had lent to X, gets whatever is the best value at that time for it. Now, if it turns out that Y used it better and the value turned out to be even better than what had been when the liquidation had been done, well, good luck to him. He took the risk and it happened. So this understanding of basic economic creative destruction has to be embedded into our judicial system. Not everything is about point scoring on some technicality.
Right. So now that we're talking about lending, we just came out from a debate that we just had around. How does regulation of banks and supervision of banks sit along with the argument that banks and financial institutions push, citing cost of compliance, and they push back some things? How do we address this? How do we marry this, or at least get them together?
So, of course, worldwide, both regulation and compliance, and I'm including here all the capital ratios and other things that were imposed, particularly after the global financial crisis of 2007, all of this was a good thing in the sense you have forced banks to be much more careful, keep more buffers. All of this is good. However, there are two types of costs that happen as a result of this. The first cost is obviously you have to pay more, accountants and lawyers and other people to keep track of all this. So all the auditing and compliance cost, that is one part of it. The other is what this does to risk taking. Now, the first is a quantifiable, and we can debate whether that cost should be 1% or 2%. We can have a debate on that. But I think the real issue that we need to think about now is whether or not all of this has led to over-restraining what financial systems are here to do, which is to take risk. Right. Because if you are not, what is finance? It's not payments. Finance is about the ability to provide oxygen to the creative destruction process of an economy, which leads to innovation, which leads to entrepreneurship, and so on. All of this entails risk taking. Now, if you tighten things up too much, you will have one of two things. One is what is beginning to happen in many parts of the country, that risk taking will go outside of the regulated field arena and go somewhere else. Right. You'll have shadow banking, NBFCs, so that same activity is happening, you're just not regulating them. Ultimately, that's a bad thing at some level, because that will grow and grow and grow and then overwhelm the regulated arena. Some of this is happening in the US, by the way. In India, we also impose similar kinds of things on NBFCs because of historical reasons, and that is fair enough. However, we need to think about whether this has now permanently lowered the rate of credit growth. Because credit growth currently is growing at less than 10% on a sustained basis, and we do need to see whether an economy which aspires to grow in a nominal rates which are in double digits, maybe say we want to grow at 7% and 4% being the middle point of our inflation. So we should be thinking of 11, 12%, allowing for financialization, etc., maybe 13, 14% growth year on year in credit. We are now growing in the 9, 10% range. And it could be argued, of course somebody has to study this well, but it could be argued that it is beginning to constrain the animal spirits of the system. Right. So there are two types of costs of regulation. One is the compliance cost, the auditor and lawyer type of cost. I would argue that that is quantifiable and one can debate, can have some objective debate. But the second one is a more tricky one. And here we do need, there is a balance and a sweet spot, but it can't be defined. It's in an objective way. But I do think that that is something we also need to think about.
So now coming back to risk taking, there has been always this talk that the MSME sector in India continues to be fund starved and they don't get enough support from the system. What is it that can be done? Because ultimately, if job generation has to come in at the pace that this country needs, the MSME sector needs to participate in a big way. So how do we address this pain point?
There are obviously, and have been around for a while, many schemes, etc., to get money to MSMEs. Ultimately, we need to have a system which allows this sector particularly to take a lead in risk taking too, because it's not about the technology startups or very big companies. The MSMEs also have to take risk. They also have to, and they are heavily dependent on banks.
Right.
Okay, the small technology startups will get money from venture capital, AIF, etc., and the very big guys will go to the capital market. It is really this space that is dependent on banks. So we need to be very careful that banks are not regulated to the point where they do not lend to this segment. Now, there is some evidence that the banking sector, at least some of the individual banks, are going out there and taking an extra effort to lend to it. So, but again, this has to be done on a sustained basis, because, as I said, otherwise you will have lopsided growth, if you get growth at all.
Right. So some of the entrepreneurs in this MSME segment, and they have been talking about personal bankruptcy issues. He said, मैं तो पैसा लगाने के लिए तैयार हूँ, पर सारा मेरा घर बार, मेरा बीवी बच्चे का गहना सब चला जाएगा. How do we address this?
So this is a very important issue you have raised, and this is actually a lacuna in our IBC. Right. You see, IBC was written for corporations, and important because without them that we wouldn't have been able to clean up the banking system, and did a good job. But personal bankruptcy still remains mired in the 19th century. Yeah. We need to create a smooth system of personal bankruptcy in India, and that is an area that many people who are interested in this subject, whether it's Justice Sikri or well-known lawyer Sumant Batra, many of them had made point that, look, personal bankruptcy is something that we really need to get our laws together. Our debtor courts need to be upgraded, and we need to have an attitude towards bankruptcy which is different from the one we have today. At some level, in fact, this is a cultural issue, not even an economic issue. We today still have a mental attitude towards risk taking, that the guy who goes wrong, he goes insolvent, is a moral failing. Whereas in fact, it's purely a guy took a risk, he failed. If some proportion of people who take a risk do not fail, then it was clearly not a risk in the first place. So we have to have a society that is willing to have that attitude. Interestingly, historically, we, if you go back and look at our texts, we do have ancient texts which have good systems of bankruptcy. Some idea that when people go bankrupt, you have to allow for this. Now, we have not upgraded it. We are still in colonial era. We need to move on to the 21st century.
Is it that there is a stigma associated with failure? We don't celebrate failure as much as success.
No. So this is a fundamental problem, not even to do with the financial sector. That I said, it is a fundamental problem with our culture of risk taking. So we need to encourage in institutions like this one. We are sitting right now in Gokhale Institute. There are young people here, and one of the things we try to teach them here is go and take risk, and do some things will be off the charts, and some of them will work, and some of them will not work. Now, there is no way you are going to be able to get people to take risk if you do not have on a sustained basis have a culture of it. If you do not have a system of clearing away the results of failure. That's what the IBC is. And it allows it to do it for corporates, but for individuals it doesn't.
That's right. You talked about the young minds in your college here, and it brings me to the subject of what is the way to generate employment? Is it services? Is it manufacturing? Or is it something like even agriculture? I mean, I don't know. Is that
So first of all, look, we are a large economy with multiple areas. Obviously, the services economy has grown very fast recently, so it's become the bulk of the economy. This is where the employment is being generated and so on, and that's great. I mean, I have nothing against that. However, I do feel that other sectors also need to be inculcated, and I disagree with those who are of the view that somehow, on one leg we can go all the way. I think for a variety of reasons, we need to have a reasonable construction sector and a reasonable manufacturing sector as well. And the reason for that is that, first of all, not everybody can do services. We need, we are a large country, variety of people with variety of skills and interests. So those sectors matter. We know that, certain level of having a certain minimum threshold of manufacturing and construction capability is important from a geostrategic perspective. But also, in the long run, if you're a country that doesn't get its hands dirty, you will not even be able to do the services.
That's right.
Okay, which is what has happened to Europe.
Fair point, right.
You see, Europe became great at doing science and design and all of these things because it was also doing manufacturing. As that manufacturing has shrunk and the generation that used to do manufacturing and get its hands dirty has slowly become older, and the young people have not gone into it, it is not as if those young people have flourished in design.
Right.
Because if you are not on the shop floor and getting your hands dirty fixing cars, you at over a period of time will also lose the ability to design cars.
That's right. Correct.
come back to this consumption story that we have, and it's a powerful lever for growth. The poster sector of India's economy, the software sector. Recently, there has been news about layoffs coming in, and that actually, more than the layoff, the menaces that it has led to loss of confidence in people, that will my job be there or not. In a situation like this, what do policymakers do, and what should the existing workforce and the coming workforce be trained for?
So, one very important thing to do here is not to stop the transition and creative destruction.
All right.
Okay? Because there is always a temptation of trying to stop this transition from happening in some way.
Right.
This is the trade union thinking process.
Right.
Let me tell you, I come from Kolkata. I remember this very distinctly. In the year 1981 or 82, a consignment of IBM computers landed in Kolkata port. There was a huge strike in the city because there was the idea that these computers would take away the jobs of clerks and typists. So ultimately what happened? What happened is IBM shifted its India hub from Kolkata to Bangalore, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
So one thing is to restrain ourselves from any Luddite intervention which stops the technological shift from happening. Technology churns all the time. So consequently, whether business reasons or the adoption now of artificial intelligence will cause some churn. But I am reasonably confident it will create new jobs. During this transition, there will be turbulence. The way to absorb that turbulence is through macro measures, not by messing around with the transition itself.
Right.
I want to make this very clear. Smoothen it as much as possible. If you need to cut interest rates and do other things in order to smoothen the transition, if and when needed, do it. But do not interfere with this transition, because ultimately technology will move forward irrespective of whether we do it or not. And we will have to adopt it. So the least painful actually is to do it as soon as possible, and to provide some cushions, macroeconomic cushions, to make that transition, but do not interfere with the transition. For example, just like this debate was triggered with a headline last week that TCS is asking 2% of its workforce to leave. This morning we had similarly a headline that a large number of other companies, in fact foreign companies in some cases like Google, etc., are hiring far more than is being laid off. Let that churn happen. It is good for Google to get cheap labor. It is also good for TCS that it is churning over and readapting itself. And some future date, Google will lay off and TCS will hire. It's perfectly fine. Let the flexibility of the market happen. And this is true also as we go into the future. I have no idea where the future jobs will arise. Okay, I don't know. As a policy maker, I have no idea. In fact, if I did know, I wouldn't tell you, because that means I know what future companies are going to emerge. I was going to set up my own company and become a billionaire, right? So I don't know. My job as a policy maker, therefore, is not to bet on all of these things, but to maintain the fact that labor flexibility remains. The academic institutions are innovative in trying to create apprenticeship schemes, upgrading their curriculums, etc., to train future, to create ease of doing business so that new businesses arise in those new niches, and that churn continues. So the destruction part will anyway happen. Technology will do it. The creative part should be facilitated, and facilitating that is my job.
That's right. Do you think industry academics partnership needs to be much more robust now?
Absolutely. Totally. And this has historically not been the case. In fact, this is a general problem in India, that every sector tries to protect its little pond. So the chartered accountants will try and protect their little pond, the politicians will protect their little pond, the lawyers will protect their own pond, the bureaucrats will protect their own pond, and this also happens with academics. So historically, we do not have a culture of professors of practice, people going in and out of industry and academia. So this culture, which exists, for example, in the US, it's a big, many great companies have been set up by people, or patents are held, but till very recently, this whole culture of creating patents, companies, etc., did not exist in India at all. Good news, this is something that is changing very rapidly. So if you go to Indian campuses, at least you will find who are the cool kids in the campus. They used to be the student leader types. Today they are the guys who are setting up startups or doing something innovative. So that in itself tells you the culture has changed. You now have the new UGC rules as per NEP. You are seeing a lot more professors of practice. Here at Gokhale, we encourage quite a few professors of practice. And that brings, so similarly, I encourage those who are in Gokhale Institute as pure academics to go out there and write in public forums like newspapers. It's very important they expose their ideas to criticism outside. Sometimes it's good criticism, sometimes bad, but you have to be able to deal with it. So this idea that universities are nice ivory towers, non-connected, and you're having great thought sitting on the top of the ivory tower, I don't think it ever worked. And in India, unfortunately, we created these unnecessary barriers, and it is true for every sector. So I'm not picking on academics, because I mentioned every kind of category tries to protect their little box. And so we also created this sort of box for academia. That box is thankfully frittering away. There is a lot more emphasis now on, for example, bringing professor practice, introducing apprenticeship schemes of various kinds, bringing in centers of innovation and startup hubs in campuses, and so on and so forth. So this change is very palpable and visible already, and I think it's a very healthy one.
Sanjeev, you are the chancellor of a prestigious institution. What is it that you are doing here? I hear that you are introducing some new course and some new syllabus. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So continuing with the thought that I just said, you see, artificial intelligence is going to disrupt many things. One of the things it will definitely disrupt is education.
All right.
Because let's be very clear, it already is the case. So it's not a technology that will exist in the future. It already is the case that if I want to study some subject, very likely I can just watch the YouTube of the best person in that subject.
That's right.
From anywhere on the planet, and then ChatGPT will do all the best, do the Q&A far better than any professor could. So therefore, this entire emphasis on lecture-based education is already day before yesterday's technology. Now the question is, what do universities then do? So my view is, first of all, wherever this will eventually go, who knows, but certainly during the transition, we need to first of all give the next generation much more experiential learning than theoretical learning. So it's very important they go out there. So hence why we have introduced a course in data sciences, which is apprenticeship based.
Okay.
Similarly, today I gave a lecture in a new course we've introduced, which will be about how to do reforms and government efficiency. Doge, of course, made it very popular subject, but interestingly, while it, whether it's President Milei in Argentina or Elon Musk's Doge in US or our own process reforms here in India, there is nowhere in the world you can go and study it. There are many masters of public administration type degrees, but interestingly, none of those degrees tell you how to actually do a reform, which is clearly an important thing to do. So here we are actually introducing, first time in the world, a dedicated course on how to bring change in government, how to measure that using case studies, data, whatever. So everywhere we are trying to introduce new things. Another innovation we have announced just this morning is to get students to understand how decision making is taken in real life. Okay. You see, it's all wonderful to look backwards and then say, oh, he did this, therefore, and the data looks linear. But in fact, when you're real world looking forward, the problem is decision making is always done with partial information. That's right. Now, how do you make so? To give students a feel of this, we have just announced a student-led monetary policy committee. So just before every monetary policy committee, a few weeks before that, a student monetary policy committee will be created with same setup, chairman, members, and they will be asked in exactly the same way to come up with an opinion what monetary policy should do. Should it cut interest rates, increase interest rates, whatever, cut CRR, whatever, their assessment. And we have said that they will then make it public to the campus. Others can also read it if they wish, but at least in the campus they should. And what it will do is, it will encourage the students to think critically about how to do this. So process reforms is about how to think about a problem and try and solve it. Here is how to take decisions under uncertainty. Both of them are skills that I can assure you artificial intelligence is not going to remove.
Wish you the very best in your initiatives, and thank you for speaking to us.